All right. Good evening. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us tonight. I'm Ashley Meyer, the Care Coordinator.
Screen, how appropriate. So I was invited to develop a presentation looking at some of the psychological effects of social media on psychological health. And so to begin my presentation, I'd like to invite you to take a look at this image from 2005. Anybody have any idea what image this might be? What, as a hint, this was taken in St. Peter's Square for responsible use of technology, looking at what psychologists often point to from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And then finally, we'll talk about social media's potential to boost mental health. It's not all bad news. If it's used correctly, social media truly can be something that brings us together and leads us to many positive outcomes for our sense of psychological health and well-being. So for this first one, how social media is affecting us, there have been a lot of articles coming out like this one showing the relationship between smartphone addiction and symptoms of depression, anxiety, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So I'd like to do a couple of activities. There's a small but mighty crowd here with us this evening, and I'm told that for the folks who are watching the stream, I'm going to bring the microphone closer to the computer. For the first one, you're going to see a quick video. And I'm going to invite you just to follow the instructions that you see on the screen. If you've seen this before, don't whisper the answer to your neighbor, although you're all still practicing social distancing. I guess that's the advantage of a small group in a large room. But you'll see some kids playing basketball, and the instructions on the screen will tell you what to do.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go!
Anybody have it? Anybody have the answer?
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
We're going to watch the same thing we just saw, I promise. It's the same exact video.
Go!
Keep on the right side. All right, this was actually a public service announcement to look out for cyclists while you're driving. But what this is illustrating is this is part of a larger body of research looking at the notion of whether multitasking exists. Is it possible for us to have a conversation with another person and be on our phone at the same time? Or even worse, to drive and be on our phone at the same time? Or to be doing homework and be on our phone at the same time? Well, what we know from our research in this area is that attention is a limited, finite resource, and it functions like a spotlight. How appropriate that we're in a theater. If you have one spotlight, one zone of attention. If I'm standing over here and the spotlight is looking at me over here, then if something else is over there, you have to move the spotlight away from me and move it onto something else. And that is the way that we think about attention, that it can only be allocated to one thing at a time. So the question, does multitasking exist? Cognitive scientists have been looking at this for decades, and the answer is a resounding no. There is no such thing as multitasking. At best, we can switch back and forth very quickly between things, so it might feel like we're multitasking, but that's because it's operating like an animator's flipbook, that if the pages go by very quickly, it looks like it's a continuous animation, when in fact it's going quickly from one still shot to the next. And so if we think that we're having a conversation, oh, let me just respond to this, okay, what were you saying? We're going to miss stuff and we're going to make mistakes, and that's part of the reason why we are seeing these deficits in attention, because we know that attention is like a muscle. The more that you use it, the stronger it becomes. Well, if we're constantly switching our attention from one task to the next and responding to text messages in the middle and looking and scrolling through Instagram while we're trying to do other things, that is reducing the mind's ability to maintain focus on one thing for a sustained period of time. And that is the reason, very likely, that we are seeing these incredibly sharp increases in the proportion of kids who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because we're living in this age where constantly their attention is bopping from one thing to the next. All right, so that's one way that social media is having an effect on us, is simply diminishing our attention spans. There's another way that has bigger implications for our psychological health. We're going to do another quick activity, and then I'll ask for some volunteers. And sorry, you guys showed up, so you're going to be the ones I call on. But this one, the first one is actually a silent activity. This was actually developed by a German psychologist who took, from like 80 years ago, he took little pieces of felt and he cut them into little shapes, and then he created this animation. So all you're looking at are little pieces of felt cut into tiny shapes, filmed one at a time to create this animation. So take a look here, and then I'll ask for volunteers to tell me what you see here. Okay, could I get a volunteer who might share with me what you just saw in that video? There are no right or wrong answers.
It was like a little circle and this little triangle was like running away from the big triangle, and then they tried to trap it, and then it got out, and then they ran around it, and then they ran away.
Okay, so the small shapes were forming a team, and they were sort of escaping the big triangle, who maybe was being mean or tormenting them in some way. Thank you. Any other interpretations? Other ideas? Who saw the big triangle as a bully? I sure did the first time I saw this. Yeah, most people see the big triangle as a bully. Everyone, it's interesting when I share this with other groups. I shared this once with a group of resident assistants in the dorms. They saw this as a roommate conflict. I shared this once with a group of social workers. They saw this as a domestic violence case. I actually showed this to a group of pediatricians once. They saw the big triangle as a kid with autism who was being provoked and then was acting out as a result. So very different interpretations from one group to the next. What's common among all of those interpretations, though, is that I'm going to go back on something I just said a second ago. In fact, you all are wrong. Because we just watched a video comprised of a bunch of little shapes cut out of pieces of felt. And little shapes cut out of pieces of felt don't have feelings, which means that nobody was a bully, nobody was escaping anybody, nobody was trapping anybody, nobody was having a roommate conflict or a domestic violence situation. What's critical about this video is that when we watch it, we can't help but automatically interpret what's going on in terms of human, mental, emotional states. No one ever raises their hand to say, I saw a bunch of shapes moving around and that's it, even though that is objectively what we just saw. Instead, we all create a narrative where we jump to conclusions and we make assumptions about what's going on, and we falsely attribute thoughts and feelings and intentions to objects that cannot possibly have them. A couple years ago, we got an IKEA in St. Louis, and one of the best parts of having IKEA in your city are the IKEA commercials. Let me share with you one of my favorite IKEA commercials that illustrates this tendency for us to jump to conclusions like this.
Many of you feel bad for this lamp. That is because you're crazy. It has no feelings, and the new one is much better.
I felt really bad for that lamp the first time I saw it. Where is the lamp? You can be in my apartment. So the fundamental insight here is that if we can get it this wrong, when we are dealing with inanimate objects. Think about how wrong we can get it when we are dealing with each other. Real people, actual humans who really do have the capacity for thought, feeling, emotion, intention, but for whom those thoughts, feelings, emotions, and intentions are no more visible than they are for shapes and for lamps. It's the reason why we all end up from time to time like Charlie Brown in this cartoon. He sees these two girls way on the other side of the field, and he says, "I'll bet those girls are talking about me. I wonder what they're saying about me. Gee, I was feeling so good too. Now I'm all depressed. Why does someone always have to spoil my day?" Well, this kind of thing happens all the time when we're at a meeting at work or we're with friends and somebody's looking at us and we sort of make assumptions about what they're thinking or feeling. Well, we are especially susceptible to that, and teenagers in particular, when scrolling through social media and being inundated with the picture of this person who, is having an amazing time, maybe just got a raise or promotion, wondering, will I ever be that successful? Or these people who just moved into a new house, why doesn't my house look like that? Or this person who just got a new car, will I ever get my driver's license? Will I get to drive a car like that? This family's having this nice vacation. We're not going on a vacation like that. These people are having a great time with their significant other at a hockey game. So this happens where we make assumptions in the same way that we can do that with felt shapes that are moving around the screen. We also make assumptions about how amazing other people's lives are based on the information in front of us. Well, this becomes problematic because one of the fundamental barriers to a sense of happiness in our lives is social comparison. It was Teddy Roosevelt who once said, "Comparison is the thief of joy." And he's exactly right. There's been quite a bit of experimental evidence showing that it's really hard to be happy if we constantly have our head over our shoulder wondering how we measure up to those around us and constantly comparing our lives to other people. It's almost impossible to have a sense of happiness because we're putting our sense of well-being into a variable that is completely beyond our control. And with social media, there is a never-ending cycle of all that information. And so taken together, this explains why the research on the effects of social media has found that its overuse is associated with increases in anxiety, depression, ADHD, and loneliness, and decreases in physical activity, social connection, and sleep duration and quality, the actual things that really can make us happy. So as long as that is the case, the question is, well, what can we actually do about that? So in a moment, I'm going to invite our administrator here to offer some ideas about how this is actually taking in effect in the Parkway School District. And then we're going to talk about, so what do psychologists have to say about that? What are some of the actual strategies that we can employ to put us in a position to override the negative effects of this? And that's how we'll spend the rest of our presentation. So I'll invite Erin up to say a few words about what this has actually been looking like in Parkway.
Hello, my name's Erin Schulte. I'm the coordinator of counseling and character education here in Parkway. And so I just sent out kind of a quick note to mainly our mental health staff, so it'll be our counselors, our care coordinators, our social workers, and said, hey, could you respond? And I said, please keep this to 1 or 2. Because I know that there are many things I could say up here, but 1 or 2 things maybe you've seen going on with social media right now. And I also need to say, I'm sure there are many positive things going on, but the way I framed the question elicited a lot of negative responses for that. So just to give you kind of a realistic view of some of the things that we are seeing from students, and I know that we in Parkway are not unique in this. I think this is pretty common nationwide. But we have seen students create accounts that are anonymous and that then prompt students to rate both staff members and other students, whether that be on their attractiveness level or other maybe really inappropriate things about whether you would do this or that with this person, or would you hang out with this person. And part of that is that then anyone can see it, including the person whom they post the picture about or that they target. We also have seen students Photoshop photos, so to make someone look not great, and then post it and then tag that person so that that person could then see what people are saying about them in the comments or other not nice things like that. In addition to that, and kind of like that, we've seen fake accounts being posted where they pose as the person that they're targeting, and then maybe post things that are like not really desirable or that they know are going to elicit other kids to think, oh, that person is XYZ, if they think that and they're posting that, but it's not really that student's account. And then, unfortunately, and I think this is kind of like a thing that I think I remember my parents worrying about when the internet like first came out when I was their age. But we have seen some of our students connect with adults that they don't know on social media, and then that adult will then groom them, will then ask them for inappropriate photos, ask them for inappropriate things, ask them for information like their address, their phone number, different things, or even be able to see where they are hanging out if they're posting something in real time of where they are. And so we've had to try to help our students with online safety in that regard. And then finally, I did just want to mention, because I am of an era where like Facebook was new in college, and I did not hear one person, one school counselor, one social worker, one care coordinator say like, yeah, they're on Facebook. So I just wanted to mention the platforms that were mentioned, just in case if you all have students on these platforms, or perhaps you don't know that they have an account, but they could have an account, because that was another thing that was said. But they mentioned most often in this prompt response, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter were probably the most mentioned platforms there. So again, I know that there are positive things happening, like different clubs and various things using this for good. I think the way I posed the question elicited more of a, what are kind of the struggles our kids are having with this. So just to give you a real picture of things that we're seeing, and again, I do want to say I don't think Parkway is unique in this. I think every school district probably in the country is seeing things like this right now, or hopefully you can validate that.
You are the only ones in the world. No other high school experience. No, we could go to any place, and in some places it's actually a lot worse. But I thank you very much for going over all of that, because these are the kinds of things that are likely among what we might consider the silent culprits that are driving many of the mental health problems that we see. And one of the activities that I've started to do with the class I teach at WashU that is most related to these topics, I teach a 15-week course on the science of happiness. It has mostly juniors and seniors. It enrolls about 300 students every spring, and I've taught it for 10 years. So at this point, I have thousands of data points from students who have taken the course. One of the questions I ask the students every year is, at some point in your life, did your parents or a teacher or a counselor have a discussion with you about the potential risks or the potential negative outcomes that could be associated with risky things that could come your way at some point that could be bad for your mental health or your physical health? And you can see a sampling of the kinds of things I ask them. Did your parents talk to you about the risks involved with sex, drugs, alcohol, money or having a credit card, driving a car, or having social media? And what I find year in and year out is that in every category, the majority of students say, yep, before I got a credit card, yep, before I drove a car, yep, before I did any of these other things, someone had a discussion with me about the potential risks, except for social media. That is the one category where students say, I wanted a phone and I just got one, and I wanted to join Instagram, so I just joined it without anyone ever having a discussion with me about what that would mean and what I might see, what could possibly be out there. And so I know that there's probably a variety of ages of parents who are here, but this is something you might consider for younger children who don't yet have a phone, is to, before they get that, in the same way that before they would get a credit card or a car, to have a conversation with them, to say, well, yes, this is exciting, all the things that you can do with a phone, but let's talk about what things you might actually see, and have a very open-ended conversation to see, are they aware of the kind of bullying? Are they aware of the fact that there's some creepy people out there who now have the ability to contact them if they're not using that phone correctly or appropriately? There's a couple of guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they break this down by age, but they say that for any child who's under 18 months of age, no screen time other than video chatting, if grandparents or something went to video chat. But 18 months to 5 years, this is where they suggest up to an hour per day of high-quality programs, and parents should view that media with the children to help them understand what they are seeing and apply it to the world around them. This way, their initial exposure to the idea of using a screen is that it's something positive and that it's something educational. For children 6 and older, it's important to place consistent time limits limits on time and content, and to make sure that the media does not take the place of adequate sleep, physical activity, and other behaviors that are essential to health. And this is another thing that psychologists are noting, is that often screen time is taking the place of time that otherwise would be spent by playing outside, getting sunshine, or they're going to bed with their phones and the light from that device is preventing them from falling asleep. Something for all of us, regardless of age, is to designate media-free times together, such as at dinner or driving, as well as media-free locations at home, such as bedrooms. This is something that you might consider doing, depending on if you've noticed that the technology is affecting your child, is to say at the dinner table there are no phones, or phones cannot go into the bedroom. That a lot of psychologists would get behind that, not only to designate certain areas as your phone does not have to be attached to you at all times, but also because of the ramifications it has on lack of sleep and how critically important sleep is, especially during the adolescent years. And the final recommendation, kind of going along with the data that I presented in the last slide, is to have ongoing communication about online citizenship and safety, including treating others with respect online and offline. And this is especially with the issues of our day, the way that people communicate, the nasty things that people will toss back and forth, pointing that out and making examples of those who are not using that correctly, and saying, so let's imagine that you did disagree with somebody on some political issue or some other issue that people are sharing on social media. What are the options there in terms of having a conversation with that, hopefully leading that child to understand that the best thing is to have an actual conversation with that person, because so much of our ability to communicate with another individual has to do with nonverbal communication, and all of that is completely lost on social media. Certainly there are ways to communicate effectively on social media, but if possible, it's best to do that in person. So, a couple rules of the road for healthy use of social media. Again, this is generally where psychologists will offer some ideas. One is to model healthy digital behavior. So to use your phone with your children, and again, to emphasize all of the good things that it can be used for. If you're using it as a tool, if you're grocery shopping, if you have to look something up on Wikipedia. Again, this is for smaller children, but to introduce them to the idea that technology and social media, the internet, can be used for very useful things. Tell your child what you're doing online. So again, showing how the mobile device can be used as a tool to build relationships and for problem solving. Pick a time to focus on your phone. So maybe you set aside time where you can focus uninterrupted, like while the child is napping, that way your attention is going there, and that you're not having this continuous interrupted attention that you're giving to your child. It's, again, setting a stage that when you're with another person, the attention is on the other person. This is going back to the earlier notion to establish technology-free zones and times, especially the dinner table and an hour before bed. Just in the last several years, there's been this proliferation of research emphasizing the importance of falling asleep and remaining asleep for a full 8 hours at night. That's when all of the material that an individual has learned from the previous day is transferred to the storage regions of the brain. And if someone has a mobile device right in front of their face, the light from that device is suppressing the release of melatonin, which is the hormone that allows the individual to fall asleep and remain asleep, and also the content that an individual might be seeing. If they're getting jealous or upset or anxious about posts that other people are making, that keeps the brain active, which prevents the child from falling asleep, opening the door to other problems later on. Another thing is to do something fun when screen time is over. So a child is not going to want to hear that you only have so much time to use the phone. So you want to replace that. You want the act of giving up their phone to be associated with something positive. So you direct their attention to a snack or a trip to the park or something that they enjoy. This can be especially difficult with teenagers, of course, but there is a resounding consensus. There have to be time limits because the child has to understand that they can do it. They have the ability to not be constantly tethered to their phone all the time. And one of the most effective strategies for doing this with teenagers is to protect their autonomy. That's a particularly important developmental milestone for a teenager. So you don't have to say, all right, you can only use your phone from 5 to 7 in the evening and that's it. But you say, hey, as a family, we're all going to be using our phones a little bit less. We're going to identify rooms in the house where we're not going to be using the phone, or certain hours of the day. You get to choose what are the 3 hours at night when we can use our phones. You get to choose what are those zones. bringing them into the decision-making makes it much more likely that they will abide by the parameters that are identified. And then, here again, before they get a phone, have an honest conversation with them. How will they feel if they see other kids posting things or experiences that they don't have? And this allows them to establish rules that are governing the phone's use, to understand these phones can be used for a lot of very good things, but they can also be used for problematic things, and making sure that they have a realistic understanding of that can go a long way. So those are some of the rules of the road that psychologists will typically identify. I'm happy to pause there if anybody has any questions, any reactions to that, any protestations of that wouldn't work in our house. Please.
I'm assuming many people who either are here or are watching, their kids already have a phone, and maybe they haven't had that conversation. Is it worth going back and having a direct conversation if they're already engaging it, they're already using it, they didn't have a conversation?
Okay, you would have thought I planted this question, but what if your child is already addicted? What if you have a teenager or any age, or what if you're 50 and you're addicted to your phone? I mean, it happens. Again, this technology was literally designed to do that. So I do have a couple of tips of things to do. One is to identify where it seems to be most affecting their lives. So is it their time management? Is it their attention span, that they're not able to focus as much as they once were? Is it affecting how much sleep they're getting? Is it affecting their stress or anxiety or depression? Because each of those is going to require a slightly different approach. But first is to take note of behavioral change. Don't just show up and say, you're using your phone too much, but instead open up a conversation about the behaviors that you've noticed and say, I've noticed that your grades in some classes have started to slip, or you seem to have trouble getting out of bed in the morning. You focus on the behavior, because if you say, you're using your phone too much, a teenager can say, well, no, I'm not, or the other kids are using it that much, or other kids are using it more than me. Then you're giving them something to argue about. But if it's, you were getting an A in math last year, now you're getting a C, that's objective. There's not as much room to argue about that. If it's, you used to wake up every morning reliably at 7 a.m., now I'm dragging you out of bed at 7:45. Again, those are objective behaviors. You can't really argue with those kinds of facts. And then once you've identified the specific behavior that has changed, again, depending on the kids, some kids are going to be very open about it. Yeah, I wish it could be different. What can I do? And others are going to be still a little bit more difficult. But you ultimately want to open up the door to say, well, let's talk about that. Let's think, what do you think are the reasons for that? And you want to guide them to the place where they on their own are able to identify, yeah, maybe I have been using the technology a bit too much. And then lead by example. Again, it's not, what's the saying? If you point your finger at one person, you got three pointing back at you. So you want to use I statements and say, I also don't get a good night's sleep when I've been staying up looking at YouTube clips. Or so I'm going to limit my screen time before bed. You make it something that we're going to do this. We're all in this together. This is affecting all of us. And don't cut it out cold turkey. Meet them where they are and see if you can at least reduce that screen time. So if you focus on the behaviors, if it's that they're on their phone constantly from the moment they get home from school until they're in bed, say, all right, as a family, we're all going to be, we're all using this technology a bit too much, and then you focus on behaviors. I think it's taken a toll on all of us, so we're going to make some changes, and you bring them into the decision-making. Where do you think we could maybe cut back? What are some of the other things we could be doing instead? People tend to support what they help create, and you bring them into the creation of the rules, but setting those limits are very, very important because, again, the technology is designed to be addictive. Before we head into the final portion of my presentation, before I open it up to other Q&A, are there other reactions anybody has to the material that's been presented so far? Please. Yeah, really good questions. So the question is that sometimes there are that a penalty or a consequence if a kid acts up, then the consequence is that you take their phone away altogether. Now, if that has been established as a rule, that you break curfew, your phone goes away. You get below a certain GPA, your phone goes away. That's different, I think, because the kid knew that going in. But if the concern is Johnny's grades are slipping, and he seems anxious, and his attention seems to be slipping. So no more phone for that. Then that's probably going to backfire a little bit. So if it's a punishment for something, that's different. Versus we think that they're using it too much, so we're just going to go from them using it 6 hours a day to maybe only 1 or something. It's a question: are you tapering off the behavior versus the equivalent of when we were kids and we got grounded? So. Good, very good question, though. So glad you could ask that to clarify that. Any other questions? Okay, I've got just a couple of more tips that I'll offer about ways that we can use this technology to boost mental health. Because again, the solution here is not to get rid of this technology altogether, but instead to identify those rules of the road that can allow us to take advantage of it. So one of the ways that psychologists conceptualize happiness is with a simple formula. Happiness equals what we have divided by what we want. Well, when we spend time, again, endlessly scrolling through Instagram or Facebook, and we see all these amazing, happy, wonderful people here, ultimately all of that is inflating the denominator of the happiness formula. And if the denominator of a formula gets really large, mathematically, that inevitably makes the quotient much smaller. And again, we've all been there where, we've had a hard day at work, we're stressed, we're anxious, and then we come home and we open up Instagram, and, while our kids are like fighting with each other over in the living room, everyone else is off with their kids painting Easter eggs or picking apples or something. Well, again, it bears repeating the quote from Teddy Roosevelt: comparison is the thief of joy. That is the fundamental barrier to a sense of happiness. So, how do we increase our happiness? It goes back to this formula right here. Remember that social comparison is inflating the denominator of the formula. The best way to increase the numerator of the formula is with social connection. In fact, if we had only one piece of data that we could use to predict the happiness and well-being of an individual, it would be the strength of the relationships we have with friends and with family. So my first tip to using technology to boost mental health is that the next time you're tempted to scroll through your phone, scroll through your list of contacts. Find somebody to call or to text. Just the other week, a friend of mine called me out of the blue just to say hello. I haven't really seen her in a couple years now. And it was a very quick conversation, but it made my day, made my week, in fact. And we have the power to use our phones, to use technology, to form authentic connections with other people. And that it doesn't take much time or effort, but the impact on our happiness using our phones to establish those authentic connections can go a long way. So I have three strategies. The first one, very simply, is using our phones to establish authentic social connection. When it comes to the second one, again, there was that expose on 60 Minutes last fall with an engineer from Facebook who talked about the algorithms that have been built into this technology to make it addictive by design, to keep us coming back for more and more. Well, overriding the temptation of constantly checking our phones requires willpower. And what we know about willpower is that willpower is like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it gets. Just like if you want to make your biceps stronger at the gym, you do that by pumping iron. Over time, the muscles become stronger, and then they can lift heavier and heavier things. Well, the same thing happens psychologically with willpower muscles. When we practice self-discipline in one area of life, like getting up early and going for a run, or resisting the urge to check our phones, our willpower muscles become stronger, and they carry over to other behaviors that also require self-discipline, like what we choose to have for lunch, or how focused we stay on our work. And this very likely explains the relationship that psychologists have observed experimentally between willpower and success. Success requires the ability to maintain steadfast attention on our work and to be able to override other temptations vying for our attention. And the good news is that willpower can be strengthened by exercising it in our everyday behaviors. So the second tip then is to take what I call the once-a-day social media challenge. And here's how it works. Once a day, I'm not saying you have to do this all the time, but once a day when there is an alert on your phone or just the temptation to check social media comes upon you, see if just once a day you can override that temptation and direct your attention to something else. Because every time there's an alert on your phone, you're like, I'm kind of bored, I want to scroll through Instagram, every time you say, but no, I'm not going to do that, I'll do that later, that is what is giving your willpower muscles a workout, which ultimately is strengthening them so that you have more self-regulatory strength for the future. Again, I'm not saying get rid of social media or get rid of technology, but the main idea with the second one is that willpower is a muscle, and the more you use it, the stronger it becomes. And that brings me to the third and final strategy, which has to do with the content that we saw in social media. Very simply, it's important to remember that things are not always as they seem. Many of you will recall this image from a couple years ago that broke the internet. By show of hands, let's focus on the dress in the middle there. Who sees this dress as black and blue? And who sees it as yellow and white? I see it as yellow and white. Yeah, I see all three of those as yellow and white, in fact. Okay, well, we could have an entire lecture on the brain science of what's going on there and how the mind jumps to conclusions and fills in gaps and makes assumptions about objective information right in front of us. Well, just like our minds can play tricks on us when we draw conclusions about the color of this dress, our minds also play tricks on us when we are scrolling through social media and drawing conclusions about all of these seemingly happy people here. So I've shown you this image a couple times now because these seem like they're all really happy people. Wouldn't you get jealous looking at any of them? Well, let's take a more careful look at this couple on the bottom right down here at the hockey game. Let's see what happens right after they take this picture. Keep your eye on the guy on the left here. This is right after they take the selfie. And just immediately, he's clearly not having a good time. So this happens all the time, where people who are not actually having a good time pose for the 2 seconds that the picture's being taken so that they can create this digital media persona that makes it look like they are just having the time of their lives. This actually reminds me of a meme that I saw on my phone just the other night. Don't believe everything you read on the internet, which was said by Abraham Lincoln. So I'll let you sit with that for a second. Obviously, he didn't say this. So the main idea is this. The mind exaggerates, it fills in gaps, and it jumps to conclusions. And this happens when we are drawing conclusions about whether this dress is yellow and white or black and blue. And the same thing happens when we are drawing conclusions that two people who are smiling for the camera at a hockey game must be having the time of their lives. So tip number 3 is that before you log on to social media, call to mind this couple and be reminded that things, again, are not always as they seem. So again, simple ways that we can use technology and social media to boost our mental health. Next time you're tempted to scroll through your phone, scroll through your list of contacts. Find somebody you can reach out to establish and strengthen an authentic social connection. Take the once-a-day challenge. Remember that willpower is a muscle, and as long as this technology is literally designed to be addictive, if we can acknowledge that, and every time the temptation to succumb to that addiction comes up, use that as an opportunity to override it, those willpower muscles become stronger and stronger. And then finally, before you log on to social media, remember that things are not always as they seem. So we've covered in this presentation some of the psychological ramifications that social media and technology can take on us in terms of its toll on our attention spans, on anxiety, on social comparison. We've talked about the importance of having conversations with our kids, and if they are addicted, identifying behaviors and talking to them about that and seeing what we can do to scale back a little bit on their overall use of this technology, and then also some simple strategies like those we just covered on ways we can use this technology as a way to increase our mental health and overall well-being. Remember that when cars first came onto the scene, it's not whether you drive a car, it's how you drive it that determines whether that car is dangerous or not. Same thing with social media. Social media is not inherently bad. It's not whether you're on social media, it's how you use it. And the reality is that all that data I showed you with only 30% of today's college students had a conversation with their parents about their phone or social media, it makes sense. The parents of today's high school and college students, we did not have that technology when we were in high school and college, and so it stands to reason. Why would we think that there were any risks? We did not experience any of the adverse consequences ourselves. But now it's been about 10 years that smartphones have been ubiquitous, and the research is coming out to make a clear case, which makes it now being a really good time to have those conversations with our kids. So I hope that some of these rules of the road for social media use have been useful, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that may have been coming up during this presentation. I don't know if we have a mechanism for those online to do so. If so, feel free to share. Otherwise, happy to hang around as long as folks would like to talk about any questions you might have. Yeah, so it's a great question on what is the appropriate age for a kid to be able to use social media. I don't know that there's an official age or official recommendation. I think a lot will say, as late as possible, but the reality is that this is a way that kids communicate with each other. I think that it makes sense for the child to have it when you feel that they have demonstrated the responsibility to discern the kind of content that they will be seeing, and that they have the ability to make good judgments in minimizing the impact that it could potentially have on them. And you might even break open dialogue. I mean, these days you can't watch the news even without some stupid tweet from a politician or somebody that's been having an impact on people. Just to say, so what do you think about that? Do your teachers ever talk about that? Have you ever heard of other kids, using that technology to acknowledge that kind of stuff is out there? But I wouldn't give a child technology or social media until they ask for it. And then once they start asking for it, say, well, let's revisit some of those conversations we've had about how other people are using technology. What do you think you might see in it? Tell me more about your reasons for why you want to be on it. It's one thing if they say, oh, well, I've heard that it's a way to check the news or to find out about things, or to, I know that our uncle who lives in California is on Instagram and I want to see his pictures, versus, well, all the other kids have it and I feel like I should have it too. Those are going to be two different conversations. And so I think breaking open dialogue about how people use technology, eventually they're going to be on it, but then once the child is asking for it, then revisiting some of those conversations that maybe you've had. But I commend you for even up to 7th grade not giving in, because I have 2 nephews who are younger than that, and I think they were on some social media apps before I was, and that's how it is. But yeah, I think there's no clear answer, but at whatever age, is having open conversation is, I think, a good way to go. Yeah, it's a good question and a harrowing one about how kids are using this as a vehicle for bullying. So your question is specifically how to address the behavior of the bully, it sounds like. From my perspective, I think that bullying has always existed. Long before smartphones or anything else, there were always bullies. Now bullies have a platform that just makes it a lot easier, and there's a level of anonymity that maybe makes kids who might otherwise not do such terrible things more willing to do it because they think that they're anonymous, or that they think that they can hide behind it. So I think that how you address it would be similar to how you addressed it 20 years ago before we had all of this. But I also think that it's important to be proactive about it. And for teachers to be talking about that. If there is an incident, that you talk with the students about it. Because again, as we see, a lot of people are not having the conversations with their kids about the potential risks. And I think that, combined with the underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, that's likely what this is causing. But I do believe that the consequences should be severe for kids who are doing this. And among the consequences should be, I think that is a case where you take away the phone altogether, that you remove them from the environment. If a kid was being disruptive in the classroom, or bullying a kid in the classroom, often that bully was removed from the room. So if the kid is bullying in the technology space or the social media space, I think that kid needs to be cut off from all of that's enabling that behavior to begin with. And God bless you administrators who are the ones who are addressing that. I know it's tough. Yeah, it's another important observation that that bullying used to be something that might take place in the schoolyard or around the lockers, and only people within earshot were even aware of it. And rumors can spread, but the people who had firsthand knowledge of something were maybe a very small group. Whereas now, yeah, stuff is they take screenshots and then it's sent to the whole world. And so I think that when it comes to addressing the behaviors, I mean, as a psychologist, my first thought is always, who are the people who are most immediately affected by it? So if a kid was bullied or targeted, or their picture was the one that was photoshopped, or something that was put out about them, reach out to that kid who was the victim of that. Make sure that they're okay. Make sure that they are getting the support that they need. Find out how they're doing. Bring the parents in if that's appropriate to do so. Make sure that they are okay. I think the next are the culprits, the ones who are behind that. They should absolutely be punished, and the consequences, in my view, ought to be severe, but also then have a conversation, an honest conversation of, well, help me understand, like, what was going on through your mind? Like, what led you to do this? Are you aware of the impact that you're having? Breaking open that conversation as well. Not that anything they say condones the behavior, but at least gets them thinking about it, hopefully in a sort of restorative justice, that they're learning something from it as well. And then I believe that the extent to which it's widespread, if it's something a lot of people are talking about, we don't want to sensationalize it, but I do think it's appropriate for it to be addressed. I mean, eventually, it's not always the case, but a lot of time these things, attention turns to something else, and you don't want to prolong it any more necessary than it needs to be. But if there is a pattern, that's where I think having conversations with the kids, that maybe the teachers are given some training on how to break open dialogue with a classroom. I don't know that it's effective to bring 500 kids into an auditorium and try to do it that way, but at least with someone who they trust, who they have a relationship with, for a teacher to talk about that. I mean, I think back when I was in grade school, and there were some incidents that, again, obviously wasn't with social media, but stuff that everybody started to find out about it. And I think that that the way that school handled it was very effective, that our homeroom teachers, we all got like a 30-minute, okay, we're going to talk about what happened. With the kids in the room, you can see who's affected by it, the teacher, you have a relationship with them, and talking about, okay, so what does it feel like to be using social media? What may have led to this? Any one of us maybe could have been led to make some poor decisions here. Let's talk about that, and talk about what were the opportunities for those of us to intervene, like what behaviors, what choices did we have if there were rumors going around, or if other people were taking these screenshots, like what could we have done? And getting the kids to identify that, and allowing them to see this affects people in real ways, and bringing attention to that, I think would be a good place to start. Any other questions? All right, well, my email is on the screen, so happy to be in touch with anyone. I feel like I should have ended with like a cat playing piano or something as another way, just like lighten the mood, because I know we've been talking about bullies and all the negative things. We all have stories of people that we've been reconnected with from like 25 years ago because we found each other on Facebook or something. Again, social media is a good thing, but we just want to be mindful of the fact that, if it's not used the correct ways, it can be harmful too. And so I hope that this presentation has offered some ideas about simple things we can do for ourselves and for our kids, to hopefully encourage some more responsible use of the technology. All right. Well, thanks everybody very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bona. Everything was great. It was a wonderful presentation. It was very much needed. Everyone that's live streaming, this will be also recorded, and we will let you guys know when it's ready. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you guys for coming. We really appreciated it.